happens in Iraq, where more people have been dying than they died under Saddam Hussein. Last month it was 5,340 people died in 1 month. And it's not just a question of people dying. Those who are badly injured but not reported, property destroyed, families breaking up. The kind of silent, subdued, obscene war of each against each that has been unleashed in that society, I think should be a salutary lesson to all of us. So when you try to impose democracy, you provoke hostility to democracy because it comes to be identified with aggression and outside forces. You also don't take local circumstances into account, and therefore that model doesn't work. And in any case, unless people feel committed to a form of government, especially one as important as democracy, it is not going to last. And I think there is another reason why any attempt to use force to do this kind of thing is not only morally unacceptable but invariably disastrous politically. For one simple reason. You see, when you talk about democracy, it is not just a question of starting elections. That's easy. You can say people, you will elect government and we'll make sure they are fair and free. Full stop. The question is, that's only the start. When the next election comes round in 3 years' time and when the ruling party is defeated, is it prepared to vacate? This is where the trouble comes. Introducing democracy is at one level the easiest thing in the world. Not that easy, but certainly easy. The question is, how do you get those guys out when they are defeated in election? And I'm going to say something in about 2 minutes. I made some study about 248 coups that have taken place since 1945. And in almost 90% of those cases, the question always is, government in power, over-centralized, over-personalized, therefore kind of paranoia about power, corrupt, thrown out of the next election, and it refuses to go. What do you do? And it refuses to go because it knows that the vengeance will be taken. It refuses to go because it's not a kind of, because there is so much to lose. When you lose an election, you don't just lose an office. You lose your life. You lose your property. Because you will be hunted. What do you do in those kinds of cases? That is the problem. And imposing democracy at the point of a bayonet, or bombing, or bribing, or blackmailing a society into accepting democracy in this way is disastrous. Because it may be all right, it gives you the happy feeling that we have done a good job. Question is, 2 years later when the harvest is collected, what would happen? So the imposition of any kind is a non-starter. The other question is, why can't we leave societies alone? Why interfere with them? Well, that wouldn't wash, because the usual arguments in favor of that view is, we must respect the autonomy of a society. I don't buy that argument, because the question is, autonomy of a ruler is not the same as autonomy of the people. And it's in the name of the people that we might try to undermine the autonomy of the ruler who might be mischievous. And in any case, autonomy is never unconditional. Just as individual autonomy is conditional upon behaving in a certain way, a society's autonomy, meaning immunity from others' interference, is dependent upon its observing certain minimal norms, which is why we have this international practice of recognition. The new state has to be recognized, which means accepted as an equal in the community of nations. So other states will decide whether that state is able to measure up to the basic standards and should be admitted, whether it is capable of discharging its obligations as a member of a community of nations. So respect for autonomy argument wouldn't work. Or to say that democratic values are Western and therefore we can't have it. I mean, that's a silly argument. For all kinds of reasons. First, there is nothing Western about them. I mean, just because the West happened to have started them, that doesn't make them Western, because they can be found in other societies, and as I say, they are universally valid. And equally importantly, if there is nothing wrong about Western technology, if that's kosher, why are Western principles not kosher? So I think the argument that every society should be left alone wouldn't work at all. And that leads me to the third argument, which is that democratic principles should neither be imposed, nor should we be indifferent to other societies. We have a duty and a right to encourage them. Well, then the question is, all right, this is a desirable goal, but is it likely to work in practice? Has it worked anywhere? Now, I don't have to press this point here, because as Dr. Singhvi said earlier to me, our own country is a wonderful example where democracy came from outside in some form. especially legal institutions. The idea of law, the idea of individual rights came from outside, grafted. It took about 135 years, unevenly absorbed in different parts of the country, but it grafted, and we take great pride in it. We take great pride in the view that if there was a secular miracle, that miracle occurred in India. There is no society after 1945 of our history which has been able to sustain democracy. And there is no society in human history, certainly not in the West, where democracy was introduced at one go. In the United States it came in 7 stages. In Britain it came in 9 stages, right to vote, property, residence, all sorts of things, or educational qualification. We introduced democracy when literacy was 26%, poverty was 58%, at one go meant when everybody over the age of 21. Never before in human history, and it will work. And this was at one level an externally induced experiment. So it can be done. And if I had time, I would have taken the examples, and I really don't want to go on too long. Take the case of Germany, where after the war, the Allied powers, led by the United States, were able to introduce democratic institutions, not imposing them. There are all kinds of historical conditions, revulsion against the Nazi totalitarianism, German experience of democracy under Weimar Republic, US Marshall Plan, attractions of the common market. All this made it possible for Germans to commit themselves to democracy. You can also take the case of Japan after the war, where the whole thing was, a new constitution was passed in 1946 and adopted in 1947. That constitution was widely discussed, quite the opposite of what has happened in the case of Iraq. And I don't quite understand why we did not learn some important lessons from what the Allied powers did in Japan, where people were persuaded about the importance of democracy. They had suffered the absence of democracy and they were already disposed to this. And the Allied powers were able to mobilize the goodwill for democracy. The emperor, breaking with thousands of years of Japanese history, was persuaded to become a constitutional monarch. He readily agreed and went round the country like an ordinary human being, saying, "I am not sun god." Not only that, but the Japanese people, at the Prime Minister's request, sent an impressive delegation of 70 political leaders, trade unionists, intellectuals, academics, to the United States and Europe to do, as the Prime Minister said, find out the spirit and the spiritual basis of democracy. Says, just as previous delegations had gone to Europe and the United States to learn technology, go now and learn